Everybody, it's Rick, and thanks for joining me on another Inwyt Walkabout. It's a beautiful, unofficial summer day here in the Northeast. It's already almost 80 degrees in the morning, and very nice to be outside without having all kinds of cold weather attire on. Just kind of show you a little bit of the side here, walking through the neighborhood. Really a nice day. I wanted to focus today on sort of reflecting on the now, I think, 34th walkabout that we're doing together, and perhaps try to pull up from the specific details and the specific areas of conflict, if you will, that we've been exploring over these past walks, and see if we can kind of pull it together and regroup around, what I'd say are the core principles and challenges to complex problem solving. So I'm going to invite us to take a look at healthcare as our reference point for what we talk about today. And let's just think about, the complex challenge of access to healthcare. Not access to affordable healthcare, just access to exceptional healthcare for everyone. And what makes that so challenging? We spend in the United States about $4 trillion a year on healthcare, which is an incredible amount of investment money. And in spite of that, not everybody is getting healthcare. And the equity of healthcare, as we know, is far from what it should be, could be. So why is that? We've been working on it for years, and it just gets more and more expensive and more complex. And we really aren't making a whole lot of headway in spite of pockets of improvement. So, I think one of the things that to point out to begin with is that the challenge, if one really looks at it, is not about lack of tools, lack of actual data that could be collected, lack of expertise, lack of methodologies that can be applied to solving a problem. In many ways, the challenge is more about asking the question as to whether we actually understand the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think when you start to look at all the different approaches that we take within healthcare, as an example, to solving the problems, is that many of the approaches and many of the consulting firms and all the different angles that we try to get at this with have some sort of a pre-assumed assumption that the problem is understood and that what we really need to focus on is the solutions to this problem. And that, to me, is probably the biggest challenge to look at and to question. And so, again, reflecting on the different walks that we've taken in the past and the different conversations and topics we've had, think about access to healthcare and saying, okay, we're going to solve that. Let's bring a group of people together, and the experts, the people who are in it as care team members and patients, and get the collective group in, and let's solve this thing. Let's find solutions. And what you immediately start to see, if you actually look, is that everybody who comes to the table has a fragmented perspective and interpretation of what's going on. Patients see things a certain way. Physicians have a certain perspective. Nurses have a certain perspective. Administration has a certain perspective. Insurance companies have a certain perspective. Everybody has a different angle and view of the problem. And where everybody ends up and where the trap manifests as to how we even get started in the right place is that we're all playing from this area of what I think is going on, and what I think should be. And all of that, what I think, is based on knowledge that we have, but also importantly, the values, the experiences, the training, the beliefs, the traditions, all those things that we carry with us and define how we show up are playing into the interpreter of whatever it is that's going on. And so every one of us has a different mix of that. And we end up becoming much more focused on trying to defend and position and reinforce and convince other people that what we think or what I think is going on and what I think should be is where we should take action. And when you have, a group of stakeholders who are all in the same mess, if you will, but looking at things from a different perspective like that and trying to solve based on what they think matters the most, you get a fragmented appreciation or misinterpretation of what holistically is going on. And now, rather than looking at a comprehensive problem, which is not possible, everybody is focused on the fragmentation, the friction, and the resulting conflict that comes out of that as the main area of focus. And so what do we end up doing? We end up pushing things through that we think should happen. We end up trying to create compromises, again, based on incomplete understanding to solve a certain piece. And at the end of the day, we start to put fragmented solutions in where every player starts to go, well, if I can't convince the other person what I think is going on, then I'm going to at least try to fix my piece for myself or for my group or for my department. And so you end up actually creating a solution and an overlying complexity to that fundamental problem that just becomes more and more convoluted because we don't see that we're all playing from the space of what I think is and what I think should be. So, what's the point? The point that I would invite us to consider is that functional problems are complex in and of themselves, but the real complexity and the real problem that we really need to look at before we can understand the comprehensive functional problem of access to healthcare in our example is to understand ourselves and how individually and collectively we're always coming at complex problems from a fragmented perspective, our perspective, what I think is and what I think should be. And we don't understand that and we don't see that. And so it's inevitable that if we're all coming in with fragmented perspectives, that not only is there friction and, again, contradiction, division, and escalation of all the feelings that are associated with those components that become frustration, they become burnout, they become conflict, they become escalations of position. That becomes the front and center activity, and all we can do and all we focus on is our piece of that and the fundamental elements of that functional problem that's really the source of everybody's lament, and ultimately the outcome of which is everybody's fragmented contribution is overlooked. So the real opportunity and the real challenge before you can try to solve a complex functional problem is you have to create awareness and start to try to understand the problem of what I think is and what I think should be, and the mechanics, the mechanism, the nature of how we do that and why we do that. And when you start to look at that and start to see it, it's not something to take corrective action on specifically, because then you're playing the game of what should be. It's mostly about having awareness and just seeing it and learning to look from a different angle. So our approach when we problem solve with our methodology in what we call precision problem solving is, the words I would say that guide us or inform our action or define it is really to articulate shared understanding before action. And the shared understanding is twofold again, right? You have to understand how we're approaching problems from our fragmented perspectives. And until you understand that, there is no way to understand a comprehensive functional problem, because you will inevitably look at a comprehensive problem through a fragmented lens. And it's only when the fragmentation of the view, of the look from or at a functional problem is comprehensive, where everybody's not saying what I think is going on, but rather moves to what is going on, that you actually can have a breakthrough and actually get to solving the functional problem. But your first problem is the fragmented perspective and the fragmented interpretations that absolutely limit the ability to see a comprehensive functional problem. And if you can move beyond that, then all of a sudden, in many ways, a lot of the complexity actually goes away, because you can start to appreciate how much of the complexity is the result of all of our fragmented attempts to solve it. And then it's a game changer. So think about that as you go about your daily lives. Pick any challenge that you have, anything that you look at in your daily activities or at work, and notice how you are always looking at something from here's what I think is going on and here's what I think should be, and see how that impacts how you respond and how other people who are doing the exact same thing respond in kind. And again, maybe you'll see something. So that's it for today. We'll continue to try to build on this and take things apart, because really the most important thing is that understanding of what I think should be versus what I think is, and the fragmentation that creates. So one more view of the side here as I walk through a very nice green neighborhood. I hope you have a wonderful day, a great week, and I look forward to next time. This is Rick with Inwyt Walkabout. Take care.